chain rattled as he shifted, dragging it across the cold, cracked concrete. His paws were raw, calloused from the relentless friction against the frozen ground, and his ribs poked through the thin coat that no blanket, no warmth, no kindness had ever touched. Rain dripped in from a jagged hole in the roof above, each drop hissing against the dirt-stained floor, a mocking rhythm that echoed the beating of his own heart. He lifted his head slowly, ears flattened, eyes wide with a combination of fear and a desperate hope he barely allowed himself to feel. When a stranger's shadow fell across the yard, he froze, every muscle taut. Yet something in the stranger's posture, a cautious, careful bend at the waist, the way hands stayed visible and soft, spoke to him. His jaw slackened, his throat trembled. Then in a sound almost human in its pleading, he lowered his head, pressed it against the dirt, and whispered through his eyes, "Help me." For 7 months, no one had asked. No one had asked. And yet, now, everything might change with a single step forward. The rain had been falling for hours, streaking the rusty metal sheets that made up the roof of the backyard shed. Inside, a small trembling body pressed against the cold earth, trying to escape the wet that seeped through every crack. His coat was patchy, matted with months of grime, the dull gray-brown dulled further by a sheen of dried blood and dirt. Each inhale drew in the stench of mold, rot, and neglect. His ribs were sharp beneath his skin, every movement a reminder of the weeks spent in near starvation, chained to a post that had long since become more prison than home. He didn't remember warmth. He didn't remember kindness. His world had become a rhythm of rattling chains, the distant barking of dogs somewhere beyond the fence, and the endless, indifferent patter of rain against metal. And yet something new arrived that morning, a shadow, hesitant, cautious, moving slowly along the yard. He lifted his head, ears flattening against his skull. There was fear in him, yes, but curiosity, a buried ember of hope, stirred. The shadow stopped. The human's eyes met his, soft and deliberate, as if measuring the depth of his despair without judgment. He lowered his head slowly, the chain clinking with a hesitant scrape against the dirt. Something shifted. In a gesture almost imperceptible, almost human, he pressed his nose to the ground, and his eyes spoke the word he hadn't uttered in 7 months: "Save me." For 7 months, he had learned to become invisible, a shadow himself, a thing meant to endure rather than live. Days were indistinguishable from nights. Hunger and cold etched the passage of time on his frame. The chains were heavy, cutting into his neck and legs, a constant reminder of his limits, of the world's cruelty. He had watched the skies darken with storm after storm, felt the sting of wind and rain, yet he had kept moving in the smallest ways he could. Survival had become ritualized. Lie down. Lift your head, try not to make noise, endure. His mind, sharp despite the cruelty, learned the art of invisibility. But the ache for companionship, for a hand that wouldn't strike, for a voice that wouldn't curse, remained. It had not died. It had only been buried. When the stranger crouched down, careful, deliberate, something that resembled hope crept into his posture. He wagged his tail slightly, testing, retracting, testing again. The stranger spoke softly, each word a feather against the brittle shell of fear. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt." The words were gentle, melodic, meant not just to communicate, but to soothe, to pierce through the thick fog of neglect. His eyes, dark pools of mistrust, followed every motion. Slowly, the stranger extended a hand, palm up, a non-threatening gesture that spoke of patience. He hesitated, as though the act of reaching out carried a lifetime of risk, and then, trembling, the tip of his nose brushed against the human's fingers. The chain rattled. The sound was terrifying, yet also liberating. It was the first sound of choice he had made in months. The unlocking of the chain was anticlimactic and monumental all at once. A single click, the final resistance of the lock giving way, and suddenly the boundaries that had defined every breath, every movement, every thought were gone. Freedom did not announce itself with fireworks. It came as a sudden chaotic surge in the chest, a tremor in the legs, a trembling howl of relief that passed through the throat before it could be stopped. He spun, collided softly with the human, then froze, unsure if freedom was safe, unsure if it was real. Tentative steps were taken, tentative sniffs of fresh air, each breath a revelation. The smell of wet grass, of earth, of rain, everything was intense, overwhelming, intoxicating. Weeks passed like this, a delicate dance of trust. Each day brought small victories and setbacks. At first he flinched at sudden movements, recoiled at loud noises, and avoided touch, curling tightly into the human side at the slightest hint of discomfort. But then came the moments when he ventured further, the ears pricked, tail brushing the ground with cautious curiosity, the first wag that was not reflexive but genuine. Meals were eaten with gusto, but also with hesitation, as if the act of taking sustenance without fear was foreign. Play returned in bursts, chasing a stray stick, darting across wet grass, ears back, tail high. A gleeful bark that startled the yard was silent, except for the soft, rhythmic patter of rain against the tin roof above. Each drop fell like a metronome of neglect, a reminder that for 7 long months, nothing had changed, nothing had come to break the oppressive monotony. He lay there on the cold concrete, paws raw from scraping against the ground, body thin and brittle, ribs pressing sharply beneath his fur. His coat, once a vibrant mix of black and tan, was now matted and dull, streaked with dirt and patches of fur missing from the harsh friction of the chain. The collar dug into his neck, leaving angry red marks that throbbed in quiet protest. He shifted slightly, dragging the chain with a soft scrape against the concrete, its sound a constant companion he could neither ignore nor escape. Days had merged into nights, and nights into days, each passing in a blur of hunger, cold, and the gnawing ache of loneliness. The sun, when it appeared, did little to warm the damp, moldy concrete beneath him. Even the birds and stray cats, passing beyond the fence, seemed to exist in a world separate from his own, a cruel reminder that life continued just out of reach. Sometimes he would lift his head, ears pricked, tail tucked tightly between his legs, and watch shadows move beyond the fence. He longed for interaction, for even the smallest gesture of attention, but each moment was met with indifference or harshness. He had learned to lower his expectations, to survive rather than hope, to exist in a bubble of resigned despair. Food came rarely, and when it did, it was portioned in a way that required him to fight instinctively against the chain and the empty space around him. Water was often stagnant, collected from a cracked plastic bowl that barely contained a fraction of his needs. He lapped at it carefully, tasting not just the water, but the months of isolation that had seeped into his being. Hunger sharpened his senses, made him keenly aware of every sound, every movement beyond the fence. He became a master of silence, moving only when necessary, eyes wide and alert, ears twitching at the faintest rustle of leaves, the distant bark of other dogs, the creak of the gate that led to freedom he had never known. Rain seeped into his fur, and he shivered, curling tighter, trying to preserve what little warmth he had. His paws were cracked and bleeding, yet he endured, stepping carefully to avoid aggravating the sores. His eyes, dark and liquid, reflected not just the physical suffering but the psychological toll of isolation, the deep gnawing ache of being unseen and unheard. He longed for a touch, a voice, any sign that someone cared, but all he received was silence. Sometimes he would bark softly, a quiet, almost timid sound, and then quickly retract, ashamed at the audacity of demanding attention that never came. Despite the endless monotony, he remembered what it was to hope. Deep in his chest, a faint ember of trust remained, fragile yet persistent. It flared briefly when he heard footsteps on the gravel beyond the yard, when he glimpsed a shadow move across the fence. He lifted his head, ears forward, muscles tensing with the possibility of contact, yet the fear remained. The fear that attention could bring pain as much as it could bring relief. Each day he measured the risks, calculated his responses, learned the art of waiting, of watching, of existing in the narrow corridor between survival and despair. And then, just as the storm above seemed endless, he sensed a new presence, a human figure pausing at the edge of the yard. The figure's shadow stretched across the wet ground, careful, unthreatening, and for a fleeting moment he froze, body taut, heart hammering, with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Something in the posture, the way the hands remained visible and soft, spoke to him. He lowered his head, a subtle plea, a silent question. Would this one be different? Could this shadow be the end of 7 months of weighty silence? The chain rattled lightly as he shifted, ears flicking to catch any movement, eyes narrowing yet filled with longing. The rain continued to fall. The yard remained gray and oppressive, but for the first time in months, a pulse of hope stirred deep within him. A fragile, trembling promise that perhaps, just perhaps, he was no longer invisible. The human didn't move too quickly. His footsteps were deliberate on the wet gravel, careful not to startle. The puppy's head lifted slightly, ears pricked, eyes locked on the shadow that seemed so foreign yet strangely compelling. For months, no one had approached. No one had bothered to notice him, and every instinct screamed that this was just another threat. But there was something different this time. The shadow didn't carry the abruptness of anger or the heavy weight of disinterest. It moved slowly, measured, almost like it was testing the space between them, respecting boundaries he hadn't even known existed. He shifted, the chain dragging, scraping against concrete with a jarring sound that made his heart pound in fear. Yet he didn't bolt. He crouched slightly, tail low, eyes wide. There was hunger in those eyes, yes, but also a spark. A tiny flicker that said he wanted, maybe even needed, connection, even if he couldn't trust it yet. The rain-slicked fur on his back gave him a bedraggled appearance, the soaked coat sticking to his ribs, but still, he radiated a cautious curiosity, every muscle poised between retreat and approach. The human crouched, lowering himself closer to the ground, hands open, visible, unthreatening. He spoke softly, the words carried in the gentle rhythm of a lullaby, each syllable deliberate and calm. "It's okay. I won't hurt you, I promise." The puppy's head twitched at the sound, tilting slightly as if he were parsing the sincerity of the tone, weighing it against months of betrayal. His body trembled, not just from cold, but from the strange cocktail of fear, hope, and uncertainty swirling inside him. Tentatively, he shifted forward, nose quivering. He sniffed the damp air between them, catching the human scent, a mix of warmth, soap, and something unfamiliar safe. A single paw stretched forward, then retracted, unsure if he was allowed to claim this space. The chain rattled again as he shifted, a noise that had been a constant in his life, and yet today it felt different. Today it was not a punishment, it was a bridge. Slowly, ever so slowly, he inched closer, ears flicking, muscles coiled in both readiness and hesitation. The human's eyes softened as he noticed the rawness of the puppy's paws, the thinness of his frame, the sheen of dirt and neglect on his fur. Every detail told a story, a silent litany of endurance and suffering, and yet, behind it, there was resilience, a will to survive that had been quietly burning all along. "You're okay," the human whispered, voice low and rhythmic, a tether being thrown across a void of months. "I see you. I see everything you've been through." The words were more than communication. They were recognition, acknowledgement of existence, a balm to wounds that had never been tended. The puppy froze for a heartbeat, then lowered his head slightly, the tiniest bow, almost imperceptible. It was not submission, but a silent question, an offering of trust, tentative and fragile. He pressed his nose briefly against the damp concrete, testing the atmosphere, testing the human, testing the possibility of kindness. A flicker of hope passed through him, swift and bright, before doubt returned, doubt that had become as ingrained as his ribs. He sniffed the air again, ears twitching at every minor sound, every creak of the fence, every drop of rain. He had learned to anticipate threats, and yet now he was trying something new. He was considering that there might be safety beyond fear. The human stayed still, letting the puppy dictate the pace, refraining from any sudden movement. He extended a finger, hovering in the damp air, just within reach, and waited. Time slowed. The puppy tilted his head, muscles coiled, then, almost imperceptibly, leaned closer, brushing his nose against the offered finger. It was tentative, exploratory, a test of whether touch could carry comfort rather than pain. The chain rattled again, the sound sharp, yet somehow, today it did not terrify him. Today it was part of the negotiation, the first acknowledgement that trust could exist. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. In a world measured by fear, time had little meaning. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he pressed closer, brushing the human's palm with his muzzle, sniffing, studying, evaluating. Every flick of his ears, every cautious step forward, told the story of a mind recalibrating, of a heart learning to stretch toward hope, inch by inch, after 7 months of being unseen. And somewhere in that quiet exchange, beneath the drizzle and the gray sky, something shifted. The first spark of connection flared. A fragile bridge had been built, threaded with patience, fear, and tentative courage. The shadow that had once been an unknown threat had transformed into a possibility. The puppy lowered his head further, eyes softening, and in the silence of the rain-soaked yard, he allowed himself to hope. Perhaps this time, the waiting was over. Perhaps this time, someone had finally come to see him. The lock clicked softly, almost inaudibly over the persistent patter of rain, but to him, it was a sound louder than thunder. For 7 months, it had been the chain that defined every breath, every movement, every thought. It had been the barrier between existence and freedom, between life and the kind of living he had forgotten even existed. Now the metal fell away with a quiet clang, and the world shifted under his paws. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. His eyes widened, muscles tensing in disbelief. Was this real? Could he step beyond the edge of confinement without consequence? He lifted his head slowly, ears rotating to catch the familiar gentle presence of the human crouched just beyond the chain's reach. The stranger's eyes were soft, patient, unwavering, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that someone could see him, all of him, without anger or neglect. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, taking in the scent of grass, rain, and this new presence that was neither threatening nor dismissive. Carefully, he stepped forward, paws sinking slightly into the damp earth. Each movement tentative, hesitant, yet filled with an instinctive, undeniable joy. The first touch came slowly. The human's hand hovered, then brushed lightly against the back of his neck. It was electric. The puppy flinched initially, ears pressed back, muscles taut, but the warmth of the touch lingered, soft and reassuring, wrapping around the raw edges of his trust. He pressed his body forward, hesitated, then leaned into the hand. The fur along his spine rose slightly with every tremor, and a low, uncertain whine escaped him. It was not fear, it was recognition, a sound that said, "I've waited for this, even if I didn't know it." The chain lay forgotten, a relic of months of confinement. He spun slowly, testing his legs, feeling the rhythm of freedom under his paws for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The wet grass pressed against his feet, the cold air filled his lungs, and every nerve was alive with sensation. He danced in circles, collided briefly with a human, then froze, unsure if such liberty was allowed. The stranger's voice followed him like a melody, soft and constant. "It's okay. Take your time. You're safe now." He sniffed, circled, and then returned to the human, pressing his head against their knees. The human laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo in the rainy yard, and it startled him at first. But there was no threat in it, only warmth, an acknowledgement of joy shared. He nudged the hand again, testing boundaries, seeking reassurance, tasting the possibility of companionship with every cautious push of his wet nose. His tail wagged slowly at first, then with more confidence, a pendulum swinging between hope and disbelief. Every movement was a negotiation. He remembered fear, remembered pain, but also discovered pleasure, the feeling of freedom in limbs that had been constrained, the sensation of rain soaking through fur that had been dry only to the touch of neglect, the smell of wet earth so sharp it made his head spin. For the first time, he realized that living was not just about survival. It was about movement, sound, smell, touch, connection. The human remained still, patient, letting him explore this new world at his pace. Fingers brushed through matted fur, untangling knots and tangles, fingers warm against a trembling body. The puppy leaned into every gesture, soaking it in, and in that quiet, the first true trust began to form. He barked softly, almost hesitantly, testing the sound, and when the human's voice mirrored it in encouragement, he barked again, louder, tail wagging faster. Freedom had a sound, and he was learning it. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost its relevance, passed in this delicate dance. Every inch of movement, every touch, every sniff, every hesitant glance was a lesson in patience, a teaching of trust, a reclamation of something he had almost forgotten existed. The lock was gone. The chain was gone. And yet he understood that freedom was not just about absence of barriers. It was about presence. Presence of safety, presence of care, presence of a hand that would not strike and eyes that would not look away. By the time the rain lightened to a drizzle, he had learned to stand fully upright without fear, to approach without hesitation, to accept touch without flinching. And in that quiet yard, soaked and muddy, something fragile yet powerful bloomed. Hope. A hope that would be tested, challenged, and nurtured in the days to come, but a hope that, finally, was his own to hold. The world beyond the yard was unfamiliar, yet intoxicating. The puppy's paws sank into soft grass, rain-soaked and fragrant, and for the first time he realized the ground could be gentle, yielding rather than harsh and unrelenting. Each step was an exploration, a rediscovery of senses long dulled by months of confinement. The scent of flowers, the earthy tang of rain-soaked soil, the faint hum of insects hidden in the grass. All of it overwhelmed him at first. His nose twitched endlessly, body alert, muscles tense, yet curiosity propelled him forward. He had survived 7 months chained, and now every detail screamed of life beyond suffering, of moments he had once thought impossible. Impossible. The human followed closely, quiet, patient, their presence a steady anchor in this new world. They never rushed him, never forced him to walk faster than he wanted, never imposed rules beyond the gentle boundaries of safety. Meals were given slowly at first, watched, monitored, so that he could learn that food no longer carried threat. Water was fresh, abundant, and clean, and when he lapped at it, the simple act of drinking became a celebration rather than a survival tactic. Little by little, he began to realize that the world could offer nourishment, not just deprivation. Play became a language he had almost forgotten. A stick tossed gently into the yard, a soft ball rolling across the damp grass, each became a conduit for joy. At first he chased hesitantly, paws slipping in the mud, ears back in uncertainty, then returned to the human with the object barely held, unsure if such a game was truly permitted. Encouragement came not as command, but as shared delight, the human's laughter weaving seamlessly into his own cautious enthusiasm. Slowly, he began to release tension, letting tail and body relax, discovering that fun need not carry consequence. Trust, however, was harder than play. Shadows, sudden noises, unfamiliar touches, all triggered instinctive fear. Sometimes, at night, he would wake trembling, ears flat, body pressed to the floor as if the walls themselves could hurt him. Memories of confinement, of chains cutting into skin, of sharp voices, lingered in every nerve. But each day, he learned to navigate these moments with guidance. A soft hand on the shoulder, a calm voice, a quiet presence beside him. These became lifelines. Fear did not vanish, but it began to coexist with comfort, to be acknowledged and soothed rather than ignored. The routine of daily care became a series of small victories, brushing matted fur, trimming nails, gentle cleaning of paws and ears. These once intimidating acts were transformed into gestures of love, and he began to anticipate them. He learned that humans could offer safety consistently, predictably, and without threat. His eyes, once wide with terror, softened, pupils dilating in trust rather than suspicion. His stance became less defensive, movements less hesitant. He began to approach the human on his own, nuzzling, leaning, seeking reassurance, testing the boundaries of this newfound bond. Emotional growth, subtle yet profound, began to manifest. A bark now held joy, not fear. A wag of the tail communicated curiosity rather than submission. Play was an invitation, not a cautious negotiation. He learned to rest, to sleep fully without flinching at imagined threats, to stretch in the sunlight without fear. The scars of neglect were not erased. They could never be, but they became part of a story that included hope, care, and resilience. Each day brought small lessons: patience, acceptance, the possibility that love could be consistent and enduring. In the quiet moments, he would sit by the human, nose nudging fingers, eyes half closed, tail swishing gently, letting the world flow around him without the weight of fear. The rain still came sometimes, the shadows still loomed occasionally, but he had learned to navigate both with a combination of wariness and curiosity. He had discovered that freedom was more than absence of chains. It was a state of mind, a willingness to trust, to move, to feel, to experience. In these moments, he was not merely surviving, he was living. And in the soft light of dawn, as the dew clung to fur and grass alike, he began to understand the power of connection. He had been broken, yes, but each careful touch, each patient word, each shared moment was a stitch in a new life, a life that was his to shape, to claim, to inhabit fully. He was learning slowly but irreversibly that the world, though it had once been cruel, could now be beautiful. The first morning sunlight spilled into the yard, painting the wet grass in soft gold. He stepped lightly, paws pressing into the earth that now felt forgiving rather than hostile. The chain was gone, the lock was gone, and so was the shadow of fear that had haunted his every step. He stretched his legs fully, feeling the strength of muscles that had lain dormant, and lifted his head high, inhaling deeply the sense of freedom. Earth, dew, grass, and the faint warmth of the human who had never left his side. His tail lifted without hesitation, swaying slowly at first, then faster, a pendulum of joy and relief. Play had become instinct. He darted through the yard, ears flapping in the wind, nose to the ground and then lifting to catch the fragrances of a world he had only ever imagined. Each bounding step was a victory, each joyful bark a proclamation. He was alive, he was free, and he was no longer invisible. The human followed, laughing softly, breath misting in the cool morning air, every movement a testament to patience and care. He ran back to them, nuzzling against a knee, then spun away to chase a stray leaf caught in the breeze, caught between abandon and curiosity. Freedom, however, was more than motion. He had learned to trust the unseen boundaries of the world. The fence no longer felt like confinement, but safety, a protective line rather than a cage. He explored with confidence now, sniffing the corners of the yard, testing the wind, marking the earth as his own. His eyes, once wide with constant alertness, now glimmered with curiosity and delight. The scars of neglect lingered on his body and in his mind, subtle reminders of what he had endured, but they no longer defined him. They were part of a history that made the present all the more precious. The bond with the human had deepened into something unspoken, yet palpable. A glance, a gentle touch, a shared moment of quiet. The language between them required no words. He leaned into every gesture, trusting fully, eyes half closed in contentment, tail sweeping the ground in rhythms of joy. When the human crouched to extend a hand, he approached immediately, nose nudging, body brushing against the palm. And for a moment, everything was silent except for the soft rustle of grass and the distant hum of morning. In that stillness, he felt the weight of 7 months vanish, replaced by a sense of belonging he had only dreamed of. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the world brightened, revealing colors he had forgotten. The deep green of wet grass, the amber of sunlight on stone, the blue of sky stretching beyond the fences. He ran toward it, paused, kicking up droplets of dew, chasing shadows, leaping in abandon. Each movement was freedom incarnate, a declaration that his spirit could no longer be chained. He barked joyfully, the sound pure and unfiltered, echoing across the yard, a song of liberation that filled the air and seemed to cleanse the lingering echoes of neglect. Yet even in play, he remembered caution. When a sudden noise startled him, a door slamming somewhere beyond the yard. He paused, ears flicking, muscles tensing briefly, before the familiar presence of the human reassured him. He exhaled, tail wagging, and returned to the game, learning that freedom was not recklessness but confidence built on trust. The lessons of patience, resilience, and healing had shaped him into a being who could embrace the world fully while honoring the scars that marked his past. As the day waned, he lay beside the human in the soft grass, paws stretched, head resting lightly against a knee, eyes drifting closed. The world smelled of wet earth, of grass, of warmth, of care, and for the first time he allowed himself to simply exist, unguarded, unafraid, unchained. In that golden light, the past and present merged. He remembered suffering, but he also felt the fullness of love and freedom, a balance that made his chest swell with quiet gratitude. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, he lifted his head one last time, ears alert, tail sweeping lazily behind him. He had survived, healed, and reclaimed life that had once been stolen. The chain had left marks, yes, but it could not touch the heart it had failed to bind. He was unchained in every sense, body, mind, and spirit. And in that moment, nothing was missing. Nothing was needed beyond the earth beneath him, the sky above, and the warmth beside him. His journey of survival had ended, and the story of living had truly begun.